Welcome to the Ultimate Dental Podcast, the place where you can learn how to create a dental practice and a business life that you love. Listen in with Dr. David Moffat as he interviews successful entrepreneurs and successful business people and successful dentists as they share their business successes, their stories, and their breakthrough ideas, sharing pearls of wisdom that you can take back to your practice and implement immediately so that you can have that great practice with more patients, higher profits, and less stress. This is the podcast where great dental practices meet with successful business processes. Thanks for tuning in to the Ultimate Dental Podcast, the podcast where thought leaders, industry experts, and thriving practice owners reveal their very best tips, tools, and strategies that will help you grow your dental practice faster. Now, here's your host, Dr. David Moffat.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Ultimate Dental Podcast. Real surprise today for you. Really looking forward to this conversation. As you know, I'm in Burrowang, New South Wales, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the Ultimate Dental Podcast studio. I've got Hendrik Lai and Genevieve Poppe, who are both in Sydney, but one's from America and one's from Australia, but they both live in America. It's kind of weird, but they're both on the same time zone as well. So Hendrik, welcome. Genevieve, welcome to the Ultimate Dental Podcast. Great to have you on the program.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Now, Jen, you just flew in yesterday, so I'm mindful that you could still have a little bit of jet lag, but you said you're well caffeinated, so that's really, really good. Hendrik, you've been here for a little while, and thank you for jumping into this time slot with me today, because I know it was short notice, but we had been speaking about having you both as guests back in January, and time zones are hard to organise, so it's really great to organise it on the same time zone, so thank you. Jen, I met you, we've just worked this out, that I met you before I met Hendrik, and I thought I met Hendrik first, but I met him in November 2016, but I met you the year before in November 2015. Now, I know Hendrik and I met at one of Australia's great tourist sites, Lithgow, and we'll come to that in a minute. Have you been there yet, Jen?
I have not, no.
Oh, you are in for a surprise. And Jen, you and I met at an ADMC conference in 2015 in Washington, DC. So
yes,
it's a small world, but now we're all together, and you two you work from the same location, but in different parts of dentistry, sometimes overlapping. So Jen, let's talk about what you do and how you help people in dentistry to have better businesses.
Sure. So I've been in dentistry since I was a literal teenager. I got my first job in a dental office because I was a naughty kid who skipped school, and my guidance counselor got me a job with her dentist to allow me to leave school early. So I've been in the dental office since we had, red and blue perio charting and paper postcards, and that's really how I got my start. And I've been in it ever since. I was a dental assistant, practice manager, and then actually went on to own and manage 7 dental offices in Wisconsin.
Wow.
So my background is very practical and broad, and it allows me to be kind of in a unique position to coach both owners and doctors, but also be really relatable to team level implementation.
It's always handy to have that. And I know with my wife, who teaches phone skills, and she says, I'm not teaching you anything that I didn't have to learn myself, because she came from non-dental. She came from being a mother to then being roped in to come to the practice. So it's great to have that I've done it, so you can do it attitude. Now, Hendrik, you're different. When I met you, you were the operations manager at West Fund in Lithgow. You had a staff of dentists and dental assistants, and you hired me on the recommendation of one of your dentists who had seen me talk at a young dentist conference and said, let's get him out to do I think it was an afternoon presentation one afternoon in Lithgow. And Jane and I made that trip out. We stayed the night before and the night after and really enjoyed your hospitality. From there, it's a bit of a blur as to what happened to you, but let's start with your story in dentistry now?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been in dental for 20 some years now. I started my career as a dentist, worked my way up. And when I met you, I was actually the chief dental officer and the executive manager at Westfund Health Insurance. And yes, I think it was on the recommendation of one of the staff members that, we brought you out with your big yellow book. Sort of very, very clearly recall the big yellow book.
You mean that one there on the bookcase behind me?
Can't see it in your Photoshop, but in your shot, but yeah, I see the yellow. So yes, I remember getting signed copies of that book that we were able to give out as door prizes to the attendees of that particular meeting. Yeah, so after I did my time at the insurance company, I decided to sort of move out of clinical, the clinical aspect, and I was sort of transitioning out of clinical at the time. And I think, to me, the opportunity to transition out of any clinical sort of dentistry full-time, presented itself while I was with the insurance company. So sort of took that opportunity and moved more into full-time consulting, heavily indexed to the dental side of things, but, certainly work with clients from other areas, including dental adjacent areas like dental technology, dental device manufacturing, SaaS and that kind of thing. So, my consulting is primarily aimed around sort of corporate level consulting and strategy development, some sort of high level operations. There's that, I think we we're talking about a little earlier, that sort of notion that vision gives rise to mission gives rise to strategy gives rise to tactics gives rise to operations. And one of the areas that I find that we don't do particularly well in dentistry is strategy, because we're so focused on the day-to-day grind that we don't necessarily, we're very good at understanding how to do something, but we're not necessarily the best at understanding what is it we actually should be doing. I think as Peter Drucker said, there's, as we're driving towards efficiency, we're always looking to make things more efficient. But Peter Drucker said that there's nothing so wasteful as doing something efficiently that shouldn't be done at all. So, I help people understand what it is they should be doing or shouldn't be doing. And then we can worry about, making things more efficient or less efficient, or optimizing workflows based on that.
That's so true. There's in dentistry, especially on the small practice level, the micromanaging dentist, he's doing everything because he believes he can do it more efficiently than the people that he should be getting to do it, or he should be teaching to do it. So that's a very good lesson right there for anybody watching this, that, can I do this more efficiently? In fact, I was thinking about this just yesterday while I was out in my farm picking up sticks to use as kindling, eucalyptus sticks, gum tree branches, small ones, to use as kindling in my fireplace. And I was thinking it only costs $16 for a block of kindling pieces from the garage. And I think that was a far better use of my money and my time, to just go down the garage and buy it, rather than standing around for an hour and a half gathering up these sticks and snapping them and then stocking them up. And they come in a plastic bag, so it's even easier. And when I put that to Jane, she goes, "Well, we've still got too many sticks." Well, you come and help me next time. But it's about that efficiency. And the example is, of course, people who mow their own lawn, and what they could be doing. They could be just resting during that time for the cost of having somebody to mow their lawn, yet they do it, and it's quite a bad waste of their time. So I'm glad you're there trying to help businesses and dental practices in the dental field, in the medical field, to be more efficient, because that's process is so important. And it's, what am I doing? Should I be doing it once, or should I not be doing it at all? I love that.
Yeah, it's very much that sort of effectiveness over efficiency initially, and it's sort of helping dental practices particularly to sort of, I'd say, like, professionalize their operations and their, how they run their businesses. I found that in dentistry, we are very good at management, not necessarily particularly good at leadership. It's that sort of that same notion of, what's the difference between leadership and management? They say that management is doing things right, leadership is doing the right things, right? So it's helping people understand what they should be doing, and then, driving efficiency around doing the right thing rather than wasting their time being efficient at doing something that really you shouldn't be doing anyway.
I would argue that we're not great at management either. Driving people to accountably deliver on the things they should be doing, even once those are determined, is not necessarily as strict in the average practice.
Yeah, I'll correct myself. I'll say we're good at task management. We're good at saying to submit an insurance claim, you have to go through these particular steps. We're not great at people management in making sure people actually perform the task appropriately.
It can be like that, can't it, Genevieve? If they feel that the task is being ignored by the person they're reporting to, they drop off it. And then when the person says, hey, where's those tasks that you meant to be giving me for the last month? It's kind of like, we thought you weren't interested in them, so we stopped doing them. And yet you may not have been interested then, but I'm interested now is not the answer that person wants to hear. So keep doing the tasks. And I think I saw Scott Luna many years ago, and he used a paper trail, and he said, whatever we did, we could find out where the blockage was, because that's where all the paper was piling up on that person's desk. And so computers have eliminated the paper trail as a physical entity. And so sometimes it really is hard to find out where our blockage points are, because they're all digital now.
Yeah, dental offices are not, at least in my experience, not high accountability environments. I joke a lot of times that it's, you go to any dental office meeting and it's the same requests on repeat. It's the only job where you can sort of expressly not do what you've been told to do and keep your job for 20 years. So I love helping doctors become actual real people managers. And their management teams, depending on the size of their group.
It's interesting you should say that. I sent an article written about how dentists tend to over-explain everything, and the patient just glazes over. And the article was long, and it just kept repeating this example after example, which was good. It's like, this is why, this is why, this is why. And a receptionist who reviewed it said, oh, this doesn't apply to my part of the job. But there was one thing that the writer said, who said, we should never pressure anybody to do anything. That's what I'm going to take out of this. And I'm going, that's not what you're going to take. And I said, what do you mean by pressure? Well, we shouldn't make people get the treatment that they're being recommended for. And I'm going, we're talking about their health here.
Right.
And so we should do everything in our power. If we believe that treatment is necessary, we should do everything in our power to make sure that they get the treatment, not just take their first smoke screen as a reason for not doing it. And so I see what you mean about having a job for 20 years and not being accountable. That's scary true, though. Very scary.
Yeah. I've met dentists who brag that they've never fired anybody in 20 years. And I think that's terrible. That's not something you should be proud of, but it is a common dynamic, especially in private practice, and at least here.
I know a couple of dentists one who went for 8 or 9 years and another who went for 13 years trying to dismiss an office manager. Saying, I've got to get rid of this. That's a long time.
It only takes 5 minutes.
It doesn't take long at all sometimes. It's interesting. How do you find your clients? You've obviously got a wealth of experience. You've developed a niche. Tell us about the niche that you're working in now. And is it maintenance only, or are you still looking for, getting people knock on your door and say, hey, we want to work with you to come and work with us because we need you?
No, I still take on clients as I kind of graduate. I only have a limited number that I take at any given time. So I'm usually working with between 12 and 15, depending on scope of what we're working on or what we're doing. So as I have some who are sort of in like a quarterly maintenance and check-in setup, then I take on new projects that really want to sort of clarify what they need to fix and get it underway. And I can swoop in as sort of the enthusiastic change manager and help push them through that discomfort of the conflict and accountability that ultimately results in a higher performing and a happier workplace. I know that a lot of owners fear that pushback that they'll get when they bring in a consultant, but I guess I've done it long enough and endured enough change that I know what's on the other side of it, and that ultimately, while we may have a few temper tantrums, everything gets happier and better on the other side of it. So most of my business comes from people I've already worked with, referring me to people they know. And, I don't have to get out there and advertise, or, I'm not always seeking, but I'm lucky enough to have just sort of the right flow of them to me as we go along. But yeah, I work with sort of two different styles of practices. I work with a lot of like high-end restorative practices that tend to be exclusively fee for service. And that's where my my own phone skills training and implementation come into play, as well as case acceptance. Similar to what you just said earlier, I don't believe that we're making people get dentistry done. I believe that we're helping people get done what they came to us wanting. And I think a lot of dental people are so afraid of feeling pushy or selling that it's really helpful to help them reframe that as helping people get this done instead of selling it to them. But then I also, because I have this background of multi-location ownership and the grind of really getting practices transitioned and off the ground, I tend to work with what I call like small groups or emerging DSOs or large multi-doctor single locations in terms of really getting that not just operational lift, but sort of a management and accountability structure in place.
Yeah, so that sounds like a very nice pond to be fishing in. You know, it
I'm
sounds
very lucky.
it's clean, it's pure, and they're driven because they've already proven from their success so far that they want to keep going. That's really nice. That'll be a lovely environment to be in.
Yeah.
Hendrik, sorry.
I said I'm very lucky. I really love the work that I do.
Hendrik, what about you? How do you find your clients? Because you're more on the corporate side of things.
Yeah, I tend to, I mean, I guess, to be honest, I'm a gun for hire. I'll work for whoever pays me to work for them. But typically, it is more the sort of the larger organizations. You know, I typically target as a minimum $10 million in top line revenue as sort of the baseline where I think my skill set can actually help them. So a lot of my clients come through recommendations from private equity groups or private capital groups that might own a large range of portfolio companies. So a good example would be a private equity group that has a portfolio company manufacturing curtains as an example. Then we might do a little bit of work on the curtain portfolio company around supply chain management. That's typically what that looks like. And, the private equity group's happy with the outcome, then they'll refer me to one of their portfolio companies, which might be a dental company. What I tend to find, particularly in the sort of corporate finance, private equity space, is that everyone at some point worked for the same consulting firms or went to the same business schools. They worked at the same private equity company or hedge fund or investment banking group. So everyone sort of knows everyone. So it's a relatively small space. So yeah, typically it comes from word of mouth. I don't do a lot of advertising. I'm actually very, very bad at advertising and marketing. It's not my forte, but yeah, I think it's just the nature of that private equity and sort of investment banking, private capital space.
It's interesting you say that because through my connection with the Australian Professional Speakers of Australia, and I was the New South Wales president for 2.5 years, I've met some speakers from outside of dentistry who I've had on my podcast because their subject matter is so relevant to dentists. I remember one guy who worked with big companies like Kellogg's, organising their systems in their factories and their warehouses. And he says, how's this relate to dentistry? I said, dentistry is just a smaller version of what you're doing, and the rules are the same. The trouble is dentists don't think that they have a business that needs systems. And so, and you'd agree here, Genevieve, that's a hot mess, really, isn't it? That's just a disaster waiting to happen without systems.
Well, they need systems, but they also, I think they think that systems end at documenting them, right? So I know many times I've gone into dental offices that have a binder from this consultant and a binder from this consultant, and they've rewritten their SOPs 10 times and then are amazed that nobody's doing them. And so, yes, they need a system, but they also need leadership and management to hold people accountable to doing their piece of the system. And in my experience, that's where they really fall short. They can recognize they need it, and they think that once it's documented and lives somewhere, that then people will do it.
So the accountability usually comes from having a coach who keeps everybody that they deal with accountable for what they do. How do businesses grow to the size that you start working with them without that accountability at some point? Somebody's got to be accountable for something.
Yeah. Usually I find that you've got a dentist owner who is a grinder, who's just worked their way to a certain level of success, and they're exhausted and they're frustrated, and they have one or two key go-to people in their organization that they rely entirely on, Like if these people were gone, they'd be in really big trouble. They know where everything is. They know how to do everything. And sometimes those people are problems. They gatekeep all of that information and they don't want anybody else to be competent around them. And so they're like sort of almost hostage to these key people. And they don't know how to go from where they are to an actual level of either a real office manager or a real ops manager who manages people, not stuff, or to developing like leaders within their departments, depending on the size of the organization. But it sounds so silly because it seems so obvious. Like, of course, people need to do what you tell them, but it's a common dynamic in dental offices that there's a few high performers and then a bunch of people who sort of do what they want as long as they're not causing trouble.
There's people who'll just turn up and make do and then go home, and they get away with it, as you mentioned, for 20 years. That key person, I like to call that the woman with the keys to the pen cupboard. You know, we can't sack her. She's the only one who's got the key to the pen cupboard. You know,
right?
Yeah, and so they've got this huge responsibility, or they've been given this huge responsibility. In my personal dental career, I acquired 3 practices to merge with my own. The fourth, which was a separate location, the other 2 I merged into my primary location. It was one dentist and 1 employee, and he had checklists and systems, and he made sure that those checklists were all checked off every day. But he didn't have to do any of the check off. But it was kind of like unlock the doors, turn on the compressor. And this one girl had to do everything. And I'm going, well, at least he followed the system and they followed the system. So it was better than no system at all.
Right.
It works
at a scale of 2.
One person. Yeah. Did you do that? But it's dental practices are a key for letting things slip, and should we mop the floors in the morning before the day starts, or should we mop them at the end of the day? Like, to me, that's a no-brainer when that should be done, But to even be asked that question is kind of like, where did that come from? Did it come from the owner, or did it come from one of the team members trying to get out home early rather than...
It's hard. I mean, I've had this happen in my own ownership and management experience, that you check things off your mental list. Like, I've trained that, I've covered that. You think it's done. You assume people will do it. I remember very clearly going to a team meeting where we were sort of at one of my locations where we were talking about how new patients have been going. It was a newer doctor in the mix and talking through our new patient process. And the office manager says to me, "Oh, well, we don't do health histories anymore." And I'm like caught off guard in the middle of a whole, I'm trying to process managing my own facial reaction. And I'm like, "I'm sorry, what? What do you mean we're not doing health history?" She's like, "Yeah, like we don't even look at them and nobody does anything with them. So we just don't do them." And it was like a huge aha moment for me that like you have to find a way to keep the basic fundamentals of these core systems on your radar somehow. There has to be some checks and balances because things can slip off of your radar, and you can have months go by where a whole entire office of yours is not doing something like health histories, a thing you would think you would never have to ask about again.
It's crazy, but yeah, and I'm sure whenever, and I don't know whether Hendrik was down here when these infection control issues were becoming very public. One dental practice, which was all run by associates, there was no hand scrub. They were just washing their hands with hand sanitizer. And so not only is the owner liable, but every employee in that practice is also liable for not reporting that the processes weren't being done. And it's just, where do they go when they find that they're seeing something that shouldn't be done? Who do they go to? And often they're told, "Oh, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that." So it's scary. Hendrik, how does what we've just discussed with Genevieve apply in your upper echelon of business management? There'd be the same. There'd be things there that would scare you to death.
I mean, a lot of it is sort of scaled up in terms of the number of locations, and then there's much more challenging sort of integration of the various sort of departments. Whereas in a single practice, your revenue cycle management is 5 steps away from your clinical department, so they can sort of walk out to the lady that does the billing or the gentleman that does the billing and ask questions. Whereas in like a large organization, you might have a centralized billing office where all of the sort of billing and insurance claim submissions are done, and that has no direct interaction with the clinical sort of departments. So it's how do you integrate sort of two what are fairly disparate systems, often with competing sort of needs. The clinical department's not necessarily worried about clinical document integrity. They're not necessarily worried about optimizing claims yield. They're not worried about frequency limitations. They just want to do the dentistry and be done with it. Whereas the revenue cycle team, they're not really care. They don't care about the dentistry. What they're trying to figure out is how do we optimize getting paid. And sometimes those two things can clash. I mean, it's sort of integrating and getting better understanding of the needs of the two different workflows. And I would say that the one thing one of the things in dentistry is that we don't actually do systems. We're very focused on processes, but we don't typically incorporate all of the elements of an actual system. So we don't sort of say we're going to abide by the ISO 9001 quality management system, or we're going to abide by the EOS or whatever other kind of system that's out there. We have a focus on processes, but we don't often include a feedback mechanism and a continuous improvement mechanism within that, which would be part of an actual system as management systems would be understood in the management system space. We sort of are very, very focused on one very small part, which is technically called the method in management systems or the process, but we don't include, things like key personnel, which drives accountability for that particular process. We don't sort of think about review processes. We don't think about internal audit processes. We don't sort of consider key metrics which are meant to come out of our processes. And how do we measure whether those are successful processes or not? So we're not really particularly well equipped in terms of actual systems. And that's certainly one thing I do work with the larger clients on is actual implementation of quality management systems, workplace health and safety systems, environmental systems, and sort of integrating that into a single sort of integrated management system, which takes into account all of this, what are otherwise disparate systems to sort of drive consistency and effectiveness through different workflows and different layers of the organization.
So when you were at Westfund, you were dealing with dentists and dental systems, and primarily I'm gathering, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you've got multiple dentists of different abilities in terms of what they can do and what they can do for the patients as well. And so you get different return on investment for doctor time and chair time as well. How do you raise the performance of the underperformers in that sort of situation?
Well, there's, I guess, a few different models that you can certainly use. You can use what I call the rack and stack model, where you sort of force rank people based on their capabilities and sort of say, if you are in the bottom 10% or 20% or whatever, you're out. And then by definition, that increases the average, the average of the capabilities of the remainders, and you sort of bring new people in to sort of to bolster any areas that you don't sort of doesn't work. The track that I decided to take when I was at Westfund was development of what are called advanced skills teams. So we recognize that not everyone is great at oral surgery, not everyone is great at endo, but there are some people that do have an affinity for endo. So, looking at increasing and working with that particular affinity to make their endo skills even better. So it raises the average again of the entire group, endo skills, similarly with oral surgery. So, not forcing people to do things that they're not particularly good at. If you're no good at endo, I don't know why anyone would force you to do more endo. And, if your time could be spent doing, say, ortho, instead of sort of suffering through doing a root canal, let's get your skills built up in ortho and increase the average of the group's skills in, the different disciplines. So that's sort of how I approached it, by sort of listening to the dentists and increasing the skills in the areas that they were interested in increasing their skills, with an understanding that what I'm looking for is an increase across the board, not necessarily a focus on individual skills of individual dentists.
Yeah, it's great. And Genevieve, jump in any time if you feel that you can add on that. I'm feeling that Hendrik's back at Westfront, he was in a unique situation because there was enough dentists there that nothing would have needed to have been referred out, which is really, really important. But
Right.
even for some of your clients, Genevieve, there would be some things that nobody in the office is doing or nobody in the organization is doing and need to be referred out.
Yeah.
Is that the truth?
Yes, that's true. And I think if I can add just the simple layer of this, when I find people who are building groups or even working with their first associate, in that more private practice space, their dentists are weird about giving feedback to dentists. It's a very uncomfortable thing, at least in the US. I mean, we're not supposed to talk to each other about each other's work or performance or their clinical outcomes at all. And so if you talk about their production, you're numbers driven and you're greedy and you're an owner and you're just trying to make money off of them. And it's this very negative connotation about setting literally any expectation for an associate. But that's like the kiss of death to me, is because you never said, hey, for us to have a successful partnership or associateship here, we need you to be performing at this level within 12 months. We're going to support you doing that with this type of CE. We're going to talk about how you're performing, what's working, what's not working, the feedback we're getting from patients, the feedback we're getting from team. We need to normalize talking about how it's going on a very simple level in order to scale a smaller organization.
Well, it's interesting. You can cook the best hamburgers in the world in your home, but you can't go to McDonald's and work for them and start cooking your own hamburgers. And
Correct.
so this is an issue that I find for organizations, even just a practice where the owner is bringing on an associate.
Yeah.
And through history, associates are seen as being subcontractors or working on a service facility arrangement. It's kind of like it's a loose cannon. They're working in a completely different way under your label.
Yes.
And I find that just doesn't make sense in any business to have that sort of relationship. And hairdressers have the same issue with renting a chair. It's weird that dentistry propagates this
too. Like once you have it going off the rails, or you have either subpar work being delivered under your organization, or somebody that's just operating too slow, or an associate who took 3 hours to do 5 fillings and the patient left very unhappy. If you don't talk about that as it's happening and normalize that you're going to talk about that early on, and you wait until there's this built up unhappiness, it is a very fragile conversation that often doesn't go well. And I feel like there's so many associateships and mentorships, we call it these things, that could have gone an entirely different direction if the doctors were just more comfortable talking about it. It's easy for me to say that, right? I'm a non-dentist, but I'm good at directly communicating and being honest and kind. And if a person's not winning with patients and they're not picking up their speed and they're never going to hit their own financial goals, helping them doing it by talking about it early on is so much easier than trying to correct it down the road when you've collected all these stamps and then you're trying to provide evidence of why it's not working.
I mean, I think that it sort of circles back to that initial discussion that strategy, vision gives rise to mission, all the way down to operations. How many dental offices do you see with the vision that we're going to provide the highest quality dental services to our patients, which is a very benign sounding vision. But, if you're legitimately going to sort of say, we're going to provide the highest quality dental services, how many dental offices have you ever seen that actually measure their failure rates for their fillings or their crowns or their root canals? I can count on 0 hands the number of times I've actually found a dental office that measures that. So if you're legitimately going to say we want to have high quality, you've got to be measuring your quality outcomes. So it all harkens back to sort of that idea of what is it we want to be, when we grow up. In an ideal world, this is where we're headed. So I think that when we talk about associates, we talk about we want high quality dental services, but we never actually measure how often associates are breaking root tips off during extractions, or how often their endos are failing, within 5 years, or how often, they're having to replace fillings, or how often they're having to get people back because, the occlusion's too high. We measure none of that. So how can dental offices legitimately say they're trying to get high quality dentistry?
Yeah, it's crazy. It comes down to even, and you would have seen this, Genevieve, a new graduate will take 2, maybe longer hours to do a crown prep, whereas an experienced dentist will do it in 1 hour. What patient wants to be there for twice as long as they they should, and pay the same price.
Right.
You know, it just doesn't make sense. Yet we put our patients through this, and even in a dental practice, when the phone rings, Genevieve, and say the steri nurse will get that, and it's kind of like, no, that's like, I say, it's like the feeling you get when you go to see Phantom of the Opera and they say, Anthony Warlow's not on tonight, you've got the understudy, and you go, like, it's just your patients are going through that when they call in. I've got the understudy. It's good if you want to cancel. The understudy will let you cancel, but if you're trying to actually get some customer service happening, you want your A team there answering the phone all the time. It's tough because in big businesses, and you'd know this, Hendrik, and Genevieve, you as well, big firms like Officeworks, Bunnings, they're just constantly advertising and running people through their onboarding system. Not that they've got jobs, but when there's a job come up, they've got somebody already trained and they say, this person's somebody that we can put in. You can't do that in dentistry in a small shop with 1, 2, 3 employees. To add an extra employee as a possible in case somebody's off sick or somebody's leaving, the market doesn't allow you to do that. It's crazy.
Well, and we're not good at developing understudies, even a competent level. I think there again with associates and office managers, a lot of knowing that there's no real oversight and that you're really not going to hear about it. People sort of start to develop their own thing they want to do within these, especially if you own more than one of them, right? Like even when you talk about like specialty and covering services and having to refer out, I can work with owner docs and say, hey, look how much endo we're sending out. And you've got this associate and they've got a CE budget. Let's get them good at doing endo. Like, I get that they're not good at doing it right now, but let's send their CE budget. And then the next time I'll talk to the owner, they'll be like, they wanted to do an airway class. And this is where I'm like, I don't care. Like they can do an airway class on their own time. As the associate with the budget for your business to develop a skill that we've identified as missing here, that's where you have to be like an actual owner and you have to have a hard conversation and say, I get that that's cool, but this is the need of our practice. And this is how you have great opportunity to increase your own production. And there's really no better way, for instance, to grow a practice and build new patient relationships than helping somebody when they're in pain. So let's start there. But they're just not comfortable at being that direct or to take away people's autonomy. Like we put these big feelings around just managing people to what the business needs.
Yeah. I always tell my clients, as soon as the job applicant says, I want autonomy, it's kind of like red flag because, you're coming to work under your banner and whose name's on the door, and you've got to start off playing by the rules of the office. Yes. Otherwise, just a chaos.
Yeah.
And it even comes down to how they hand over, how they speak to patients, how they speak to staff. It can become a hot mess real quick if there's no, I'm here to follow your systems. I like your systems.
I like the way you do it, and I want to be part of this organization.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, again, like autonomy comes, at least, in my environment, comes with this like big amount of feeling. And it's like you're crushing their professional judgment if you would have any opinion about how they deliver anything. And so associates are just like unleashed because they're a dentist and that's their only qualification. And it's mind boggling to me what I'll sometimes see or hear a doctor say when I'm on location. And I'll just say, have you ever even listened to this doctor do a new patient exam? Like, have you ever even heard how they start that conversation? And they're like, well, no. Like, they just literally fill out their paperwork and put them in a location. It's boggling to me.
Yeah. It's crazy. And again, as you mentioned, Genevieve, when they graduate, they've got a certificate, but there's no certificate in business or in HR or in marketing or even how to read spreadsheets.
Correct.
So, Hendrik, you're good at spreadsheets, I understand.
I wouldn't say I'm competent at them and I know how to use them. But yeah, I think one of the areas that we do need, to your point, David, some additional training in dental schools is in the business side of things, particularly nowadays in analytics. It's that idea of what gets measured gets managed, right? So, when we're fixating on the wrong things, we're sitting there measuring things that don't actually really matter that much. We're sort of not doing our businesses or the patients any favors.
No, managing is really, really important. And, again, the human brain doesn't really work well with more than 3 things at one time in terms of tasks. Sometimes I've got one coach, he's just narrowed it down to just do one task. every 6 weeks or every 8 weeks. You do one task every 8 weeks, you'll get 6 tasks done in a year. You try and do 3 tasks in 8 weeks, you'll get none done in a year. And so sometimes we've got to just simplify things down to what can we keep people focused on. But you're right, sometimes there's so much overload in data collection of things that don't really matter. Empty chair time is one that really gets me. Got me for you love this, Genevieve. You know, the reps would come around and they'd say, every time I go into Dr. Jones down the road, there's never anybody there. He can't be busy. He might be just doing a full mouth in the morning and a full mouth in the afternoon. There's never anybody sitting in his waiting room. But he's doing fine. Whereas the guy who's got kids climbing all over the walls, he could be really struggling to meet payroll. It's somebody's perception is not the true reality often in those sort of situations.
Yeah. Hendrik will tell you that there's a place to measure that. And there are certain models where like chair utilization is actually an important metric, but it's not most of them. It's not your average organization that relies on that one, but it's true. I have had conversations with doctors. I currently have a client I love, but he's obsessed with his marketing ROI. Like they get fixated on one thing and they want to like boil, like he's just an example. I have tons of people who will just get held up on like they can't get this perfect answer to one thing and it almost derails their focus on every other thing when I don't want to say it doesn't matter. Of course it matters that your marketing is working, but it's just it will hold up their ability to process or get out of the weeds to handle other things that come their way. So I agree to Hendrik's point. Like it would be so great now that data is so much more readily available in dashboards and in tools to dentists. And we used to have to print reports and put them in Excel spreadsheets and extrapolate all this meaning out of it. Now it's all there, but it's almost, given that so many dentists are so analytical, it's almost a crutch to them. They get in that analysis paralysis and then they just can't pick one thing or 3 things that we're going to focus on as an organization.
Well, that's where they need a coach. That's where they need someone like you to say, all right, we've got this data. What do you think we should do? And if they give you the answer that you think, then you say that's fine. And if they don't give you the answer that you think, you say, have you considered?
Let's move this needle first. That's a great idea, but let's park that for now and let's do this first. This will get you a lot more comfortable. This will get you in a better cash flow position. And a lot of times it's something, not fun part about my job is a lot of times it's something that's not sexy. It's not something they want to do. It's being sort of brilliant at the basics and sort of shoring up. Just, I mean, at the end of the day, running especially a single location private practice isn't fundamentally hard. It just involves stuff that nobody wants to do. I tell my first practice story. The first practice I bought was doing about $600,000 a year. And the next year we did $1.1 million. And people were like, how did you do that? And I'm like, you know what? I opened one more day and I called everybody that was overdue. That's what I did. And it wasn't rocket science, but nobody wants to call on recare. Nobody wants to do this old fashioned stuff that fundamentally grows a dental practice. Nobody wants to call back a patient that didn't schedule and say, hey, we got to take care of this thing. I'm checking on you. Like a lot of times what I point them to and try to put effort to and accountability around is stuff that isn't rocket science. It's not really exciting. It's not a new technology. It's nothing like that. It's just doing the stuff that grows a dental.
And it's important to find those things that will grow the practice quickly. Yes. And again, that's what a coach will do. They will point out the glaringly obvious, which sometimes the owner just doesn't see or doesn't want to hear, and yet 9 times out of 10 that's the action that needs to be taken. Hendrik, back to something that Genevieve just said there, and I'm sure you see it at the bigger level, analysis paralysis. It's still there in board meetings, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's just the amount of data. I work with a client, and just so you know, like Excel, it tops out at 5 million rows, right? So it sounds like a lot of data, but there are the amount of data that we would analyze for like a large dental client exceeds the capabilities of what Excel can actually import. So then you've got to go to specific business intelligence platforms like Power BI or Domo or Tableau or something like that in order to be able to analyze that particular data. And I think the paralysis comes from not understanding the data that actually matters, because there's a lot of noise and a lot of just, rubbish data out there that doesn't have any real bearing on, the decisions that should be made. But where we tend to fail is that we allow this noise to sort of be what takes over the discussions within organizations. A great example, maybe at a small level, and I see this at the office level, is spending, staff meeting times going over, rather than going over unscheduled treatment or things like that. There's a fixation on, which brand of coffee should we be buying? I mean, what flavor coffee should we be buying? It's stuff that doesn't really matter in the scheme of things, but that's what takes up all the time in the discussion, not what actually moves the needle. And certainly at the corporate level, where you're sort of working with departments that are trying to protect their own little patch of turf, they're going to present sort of data that confirms, confirmation bias, right? That sort of confirms what their perspective is and why they need specific resourcing, which, means taking resourcing away from another department. So it does sort of, it can create internal turf wars in these large organizations. And, that does drive down efficiency and effectiveness within the organization as a whole.
It's as I sold my practice to Australia's first corporate roll-up, and when it got on-sold then to the second owner, that's when things really became difficult for me to run the practice in the way that I used to, which was very profitable because it was just people coming for meeting after meeting after meeting who had no idea of what a good dental practice really did, but more, the old Amway line, the purpose of a meeting is to make another meeting, create another meeting, was their whole job description. Oh, we need another meeting. And there was so much paralysis in that sort of situation. I don't know, sadly, and after I left my practice, its turnover never matched what was going on when I was there. And it could have just been so much better. Not that, I wasn't ready to go. I was probably well ready to go anyway, but you would see that too, Genevieve, that when somebody has a vested interest in their success, then growth happens. Yes. When there's constant cold water poured on success or artificial roadblocks put in place, it can become very frustrating. And it's the same, I guess, Hendrik, back to the boardroom. There'll be people who want things to happen, and they just don't get the votes to get the actions happening sometimes.
I think it's very, very different sort of philosophies on how different organizations approach operations. There's some models that are more about, hey, the reason we bought your practice is because you are a really, really good practice. We don't want to change anything. You keep on managing it the way that you've always managed it. All we want from you is to maintain, the EBITDA or the profit level that we had, or grow it by some number that we had when we bought it from you. Whereas others, they like to buy underperforming practices and get very operationally involved to turn them into A+ practices. So I think it's sort of largely a function of the philosophy of the private equity group and the investment group. I think that there's a place for both of them. And, strangely in the private equity space in dentistry, there's a liquidity event every 4.8 years, which means there's going to be some sort of sale or some sort of recapitalization event, in every 5 years, which means there's not really a lot of time for these groups to actually make changes that become operationally effective. And so I can see why it looks like some of the changes that are made can be seen as quite heavy-handed, because you're trying to affect a change that would realistically take 10 or 15 years to actually yield results. You're trying to force that into a less than 5-year time frame. So yeah, I can see it from both, the practice and operation side, as well as sort of that executive management and the private equity owner side.
Genevieve?
I have loaded feelings about it. I do think that, on a huge scale, the way that you get acquired in a big group is very different than a small buying group. I learned very early on not to promise people that everything would be the same, right? When you are a new owner of a dental practice, you now have debt on it. You have different pressures on it than a guy who's had it free and clear for 30 years, right? So I learned very quickly not to say everything's going to be the same, because it's not, right? Coming in as the owner, I have different pressures on me to deliver results, and a different pressure on it. And I also learned pretty quickly that the idea of building consensus or buy-in on everything really slows things down, and it really makes change even more painful in certain ways, because you're giving people the sense that they have input and then making a decision against what they want anyway. And so I believe more in clear communication of this is what we're doing and why, than trying to get everybody to buy into it initially, and sort of just pushing through it and then making it okay for them and showing them how and why it works.
Yeah, consensus can be very much like herding cats sometimes. It's just
You'll never
very,
get it, and you ultimately dilute whatever the initial objective was in trying to please everybody. So, in a small scale, that's where I watch, second to this sort of analysis paralysis is the sort of like idea that if we just keep talking about this, everybody will get on board. And, as the leader or the owner, you sometimes just have to decide this is what meets my standard or what I'm trying to do, and this is what we're doing. And really, you would have been better off to just say that 10 meetings ago. You wouldn't have lost all this time.
agree wholeheartedly. And I think one of the best lessons I had as a dentist, as an associate in my first year out, had a patient while I was explaining what I wanted to do for him, and he just put his hand up like this, and he said, I said, what's that? He said, Doc, he said, you're the guy in the white coat. Just tell me what I've got to do. What's with all these options? And I realized that what he was saying was, he didn't have a dental degree.
Correct.
I did. He wanted me to tell him what to do. And sometimes we need to be like that as leaders in our business. Is you've been hired, Hendrik's been hired, I've been hired to show them the best way, the way that worked for us, the way that's worked for our clients, the way that we know. They're the two things. If it's worked for you and it's worked for your clients, it works. If it doesn't work, it's not what you're selling them. It's in the mirror at home for them. Look in the mirror and there's your answer as to why it's not working. It's somebody's objecting. And so when you can just give direction without trying to gain consensus, amongst everybody, there are some uneducated people that shouldn't be given the vote sometimes.
Well, people want to protect their own comfort zone. Sometimes what you want is pushing people out of their comfort zone, and it makes them feel exposed. And if you can just show them that you're the leader, you're going to decide this is what we're going to do, and we'll support you through it. That's actually a way to really build a team and to actually build a strong team, rather than that weird, awkward family dynamic a lot of dental offices operate in, where we just want everybody to be happy instead of us to actually perform as a business team.
And I think that's a good way to tidy this up. That you've brought that perspective, that family dynamic, that friend dynamic. I'll just ask my family. I'll just ask my friends who aren't dentists, who aren't business people, don't understand, and they don't want to lose their friend in case their friend or their family member becomes successful. And so they'll talk them out of it as well. And that's always in the back of the mind of somebody who's trying to grow, but then maybe if I can get somebody to agree with the resistance, I won't do it. And that's never the right answer, is it?
Yeah, no.
Well, we've run out of time. We've come to 58 minutes. This is great. Thank you very much for joining me today, Genevieve Poppe and Hendrik Lai. It's been great having you as guests on the Ultimate Dental Podcast. For the show notes, what's the best way for people to contact you, either of you, both of you, if they want to find out more about what you can do for them or in dentistry or in business?
Sure. I'm pretty easy to find. I'm not a lot of Genevieve Poppies out there on social media or LinkedIn, but my website is Poppe, spelled Poppe, practicemanagement.com. And there's a quick schedule a call link right from there.
Perfect. Hendrik?
Yeah, and I'm not too many Hendrik Lais around, but you can reach me at Hendrik at Viturtal, Viturtal.com. And the website is the same, Viturtal.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you. And you're both on LinkedIn as well. So I'll put that in the show notes. Thank you again. Enjoy your visit down here, Genevieve. And Hendrik, good to see you back in the time zone that matters.
Anyway, you got us there.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time this afternoon.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for tuning in to another inspiring episode of the Ultimate Dental Podcast. We appreciate each and every one of you for being a part of our dental community and joining us each week on this incredible journey. If you found value in today's episode and you don't want to miss out on future episodes, packed with expert insights and actionable strategies, here's how you can stay connected with us. Firstly, hit that subscribe button. Whether you're listening on your favorite podcast platform or watching on our website, subscribing ensures you'll never miss an episode. Secondly, share the love. If you know a fellow dentist or colleague who could benefit from the wisdom and knowledge that we share here, please share our podcast with them. Also, please share the podcast on your socials by simply clicking on the social icons wherever you view or listen to this podcast. Together, we can all do our bit to elevate the dental profession. And finally, stay engaged with us. We love hearing from you. Your questions, comments, and feedback fuel our mission to provide the best content for your professional growth, your personal growth, and for your practice growth. Remember, your journey to creating a dental practice and a business life that you love is our mission, and we're excited to be your trusted guide along the way. Thank you for being a part of the Ultimate Dental Podcast. Until next time, keep smiling, keep striving, and keep on tuning in to the Ultimate Dental Podcast.